may come. If not, it's okay. Be few, we have to be few. He's leaving already. I mean, it's just not like thank you all for coming. I'm not really the normal sort of reader. I have a new book out called Browsing's Year of Reading, Collecting, and Living with Books. And I thought I would just talk a little bit about it and maybe read bits and pieces from it, give you a sense of it. And so it's something you might want to bear in mind if you care to give yourself a holiday present or need presents for the upcoming holidays or birthdays or whatever. Yesterday being my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Anyway, this book is had its origins about 3 years ago. Friends of mine who run the American Scholar magazine, it's the quarterly journal of the Phi Beta Kappa Society, asked me if I would take over writing a weekly essay for their homepage. They never used the word blog or anything like that. They had different columns, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I think I was Friday. They had, from the beginning, William Zinsser, the guy who wrote On Writing Well, which many of you probably know from school days. He'd been writing it for 6 or 7 years, but he got to 90 and he wanted to give it up. So they asked me if I'd take it over. I said I'd do it for a year. I tried something new. I wasn't sure that I'd care for this, but my remit was to write about anything bookish. But the essays could be personal, and should be personal, in fact, and I certainly made them so. And so the year went by, and I wrote about different things, and I'll tell you more. And at the end of that year, I put them aside. They were online. They'd been online. They'd had to run, and I didn't know what I thought of them. But I waited a year, and a year later, I said, "Well, I'll take a look at them. I'll read them over." And I read them over, and I thought they stood up pretty well as a portrait of a freelance book reviewer and book person, collector, and also partly as a portrait of Washington in that particular time. So I talked to my agent, and they peddled it to a couple places, and a small publisher called Pegasus was interested. Come on in. You've missed the best part, but that's okay. Yeah, this way we're giving the $20 bills away. They've all got theirs. Anyway, Pegasus was interested, and so they did a really handsome book, and as Bob Knowlton here knows, the book jacket was designed by Peter Straub's son-in-law, Michael Fusco Straub. He's now taken Straub. He's married to Emma Straub, Peter's daughter, the novelist. Also a fellow Oberlinian. There's an essay in here about my college, Oberlin, where she also went to school. But anyway, these pieces were supposed to be short, 500 or 600 words, which is what I wrote for the first one. But I immediately doubled them and sometimes tripled them. I'm more loquacious than I perhaps needed to be, but usually I had some kind of theme. The pieces are personal. They're light essays. They're what you might call a bookman's essay, if you remember people like Vincent Starrett in the Chicago Tribune, or even Clifton Fadiman, or figures who would write for sort of middle-brow journals like the Saturday Review of Literature. And they are, I stress, more personal than any of my other books, except for the memoir I wrote some years back. But people seem to have actually liked this. The book has done extremely well for the kind of book it is. I don't read the reviews of my books. As I say, I can dish it out, but I can't take it. But I've gotten feedback from people that it's been really nice, and it's been reviewed for a couple of weeks ago in the Times Literary Supplement. So I've been pleased with the reception. And I've got more of these sorts of essays. I also write similar essays for the TLS for their column they called Freelance. I write half a dozen or more a year for them. So another couple of years I'll have enough for a similar book. But I thought I would read a couple paragraphs from one or two essays, and maybe one essay, and hired about writer's block, which seemed to me an appropriate thing for a conference like World Fantasy. But give you a sense of the topics I cover, and whatever came to mind or whatever was in the news. The first essay was about William Zinsser, since I was taking over from him. I wrote about bookish pets, authors' favorite pets, and my own views about pets, and talked about my cat and dog. Another about paper, and various kinds of notebook paper. Had to do with the beginning of, I guess, fall, when kids used to all get our big chief and goldenrod papers. And there was a lot of decision making when you were 9 years old, figuring out what kind of paper you wanted for the school year. I got to talk about that. Book sales. Used to have lots of big book sales at schools and organizations like Brandeis and Vassar. And going to them and what it was like. What else? There's an essay on Marseille. I lived in Marseille for a year, my gun running days. So I talk about that. As I mentioned, Oberlin. I wrote an essay about Anglophilia, about liking all this English stuff. There are a couple of rants in here too. There's one rant about Pepco. Those who don't live in Washington won't know what it is, but it's the power supply company, the Potomac Electric Power Company. And during the time the pieces were being written, we had the derecho come through, and we had, in Montgomery County, we had a week without any power. And so I gave this incredible rant about Pepco. And, partly because I have a lot of books, and I keep some of these books in the basement. If you have a basement with books in them, you've got to run a dehumidifier in the summer. This is the summertime, by the way, when the temperatures were also as hot as they'd ever been in Washington. Several days, consistent days of 100-degree temperatures. You could not sell your children for ice. And I don't know, they're Charlottesville going to go up. In the course of this year, I won a prize given by the Association for Scholarly Editors for the best essay about textual editing. I'd written a piece about Wind in the Willows in 2 different annotated editions for the New York Review of Books. And so I got a letter one day that I won this prize. So they were meeting in Charlottesville, so they asked if I would come down to see it. Charlottesville is like 2.5 hours from Washington. So I talk about going to Charlottesville. Of course, I was supposed to go to this convention, but I got sucked into going to all these used bookstores instead. I sort of appeared at the cocktail party beforehand and during the dinner. Let me stress that I think the book isn't exactly all humor. There are lots of, it's got jokes in it. There's an essay on Dover books, on praise of Dover books, particularly E.F. Blyler's association with Dover books. He's the guy who brought on all the Dover editions of ghost stories and detective stories from the 19th century, and really helped keep alive genre fiction from 100 years ago and more. And odds and ends and various things, but I thought I would just read a little bit so you get a flavor. Read the first couple of graphs from one called Scribble Scribble. My 3 sons, all in their early to mid-20s, can sign their names when they concentrate. That's just about it. During their elementary school years, Chris, Mike, and Nate were patiently taught the mysteries of cursive handwriting. But since then, they've tapped their thumbs on smartphone keyboards far more than they've gripped a pen or pencil. Though their typing may eventually lead to repetitive stress syndrome, they'll never develop a callus on the top knuckle of the middle finger of their right hand. Everybody remembers those from school days, of a certain age at least. My own handwriting is essentially illegible to anyone other than myself, and after a few days, even I can't always make out the meaning of my scribbles. Deciphering my lists of important things to do would challenge Champollion far more than breaking the secret of the Rosetta Stone. Eminent doctors, envious of a scrawl of such complete and utter opacity, have come to me and humbly asked if I might conduct seminars or offer master classes at medical conventions. I'm going to talk more about a friend of mine who's a great calligrapher, Sheila Waters, who's the only member of the Scribes and Illuminators, an English group in America, which is the elite calligraphy group. She's wonderful woman. I just mentioned her in a review I wrote just before I got here, a book about Napoleon. But there's a famous book called The Campaigns of Napoleon by a guy named Chandler. And the maps are famous in this book, and Sheila did the maps. And her son, Julian, who never went to college, she trained, became the White House calligrapher for about 10 years. And she's a wonderful writer. Let's see. Okay. I'll read one whole essay. What did I mark that page? I have no idea. Twilight of an Author. While I love most, not to say all, of James Thurber's cartoons, there are a handful that seem especially choice. An example? Picture a courtroom with a judge, a startled man in the witness box, and a prosecuting attorney who is pointing triumphantly at a large kangaroo. The caption, "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." My absolute favorite, though, depicts a guy sitting hopelessly at a typewriter, surrounded by crumpled sheets of paper, while his wife looks down at him and asks, "Has your pen gleaned your teeming brain?" Her question is based on a famous quotation from Keats, "When I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain." Certainly the fears of that doomed tubercular genius dead at 25 were wholly justified. But I suspect all authors occasionally sit down at their keyboards or open their notebooks and find that nothing happens. Every idea seems stale, every sentence hackneyed. At such moments, writers, whether of novels, essays, poems, or book reviews, adopt various coping strategies. Perhaps a walk around the block or a new environment will clear the head, reopen the floodgates. For some, a move downstairs to the dining room table or a weekend escape to a friend's condo on the Chesapeake will be enough. Alternately, one could just hunker down for the duration. Flannery O'Connor resolved to be at her work table every day between 9 and 12, no matter what. If inspiration struck, she was ready. And if it didn't, she still couldn't leave her desk, and so she might as well scribble away at something. Occasionally, of course, full-fledged writer's block sets in. The harder you try, the worse it becomes. Frustration intensifies exponentially before ushering in a long visit from that Pilgrim's Progress favorite, the giant despair. His voice echoes in your head. Everyone knows you're not any good. Never were, really. Just an untalented phony from the get-go. Face it, you've been kidding yourself for years. Your so-called work is completely hopeless, not even a joke. Whatever gave you the idea that you could write in the first place? Look at this pitiful stuff. No one cares anyway. Sometimes writer's block can be overcome with luck, persistence, and various subterfuges. Robert Sheckley, a master of the black-humored science fiction story, suddenly found that his hitherto steady flow of ideas had dried up. There'd been too many drugs, too much hard living. But eventually he started to produce saleable material again by telling himself, I can no longer write real Sheckley stories. That's obvious even to me. But I can certainly turn out imitation Sheckley stories. And so he did. For readers, those imitations were okay, not great, but still enjoyable, still Sheckley-esque. In effect, this is what many writers gradually end up doing in their later years. More and more, they become pale imitations of themselves, reworking old themes, retelling the old stories, relying on professional smoothness to cover up the lack of freshness and originality. While kindly friends assure them that they've still got it, editors seem to blue pencil their submissions more and more, or refuse their work altogether because they're overbooked. Eventually the day arrives when Robert Frost's Provide, pops into the graying head. No memory of having starred, atones for later disregard, or keeps the end from being hard. But what's a writer to do? Should he or she just pack it in? How then will the rent get paid? And what about the car insurance? So you put a Willie Loman shine on your shoes and a Gene Kelly smile on your face, and you soldier on. Hey Sid, I was wondering if you could use an article on... At night, though, the writer stews, blaming the hated literary establishment which refuses to acknowledge real talent. Younger people, nothing but good looks, probably sleeping with the judges, take home the awards and the big fellowships. There really is no justice. Before long, the tab at the local saloon is running into triple digits. If illness strikes, so much the worse, especially with so much left unaccomplished. All you want is to bring out one more book, the one that will finally redeem all the dashed hopes and dreams. Not since The Great Gatsby has any novel so beautifully captured the American experience. These are the poems Keats would have written had he lived. Flaubert would envy such prose. Such essays change forever the way we think about literature. And on and on. But finally, instead of such praise and plaudits, one hears only the rasping voice of the eternal pub keeper. Hurry up, please, it's time. Let me stress, though, that none of this applies to you or me. Nope, could never happen to you or me. Not in a million years. Provide. Anyway, there are a bunch of essays about this, I don't know, book sales, or lots about sort of fantasy and weird literature. During the power outage one day, I was desperate, so I drove to Wonder Book and Video up in Frederick, which is about an hour from Washington. They had power, so I spent all day there in their cool air conditioning and bought, like $200 worth of books, But I was at least happy to get out of sweltering D.C. and frustration about having no power. And these essays were fun to write. I mean, I write book reviews for a living and articles, and I write a weekly review for the Washington Post, and I write pretty often for half a dozen other venues. I mentioned the TLS and New York Review, write for them, and other, Wall Street Journal. Anybody will pay me a dime to write about books. But these pieces were varied. Some were somewhat funny, some were light, but they were respites from the more serious kinds of essays. And I definitely am the voice that leads you through the book. And, I found them easy to write in some ways, despite having just read this one here, because usually I have to think about the book I'm reviewing. I want to be fair to it, but I also want to be entertaining to the reader. And you're juggling lots of things, but when you're writing essays of your own, you can kind of just follow wherever your thought goes, wherever the imagery takes you. Although I have those who know my earlier stuff, I don't really have a flair for imagery. Nothing ever reminds me of anything else. So I can pay a lot of attention to nouns and verbs and sprinkle things with literary allusions. I hope not too often. As I say, people have liked the book. It ends with, I'll read a little bit at the end. The last essay is called A Positively Final Appearance. Takes its title from, the titles often don't have a lot to do with the essays, although this one does. This is the title of Alec Guinness's last volume of autobiography. He'd written 2 previous ones. This was the third one. It was called A Positively Final Appearance. And I give some talk about books and books in our lives and stuff. So I'll read the third of these points. I have 3 points in this final essay. 3, books don't just furnish a room. A personal library is a reflection of who you are and who you want to be, what you value and what you desire, of how much you know and how much more you'd like to know. When I was growing up, there used to be an impressive librarian's guide entitled Living with Books. I think that's the right idea. Digital texts are all well and good, but books on shelves are a presence in your life. As such, they become a part of your day-to-day existence, reminding you, chastising you, calling to you. Plus, book collecting is, hands down, the greatest pastime in the world. Well, I could go on with numbers 4, 5, and 6, whatever they might be, but I don't want to be overly pedantic or allow this farewell to go on too long. Elizabeth Bibesco once said that a goodbye, like a welcome, shouldn't be overextended. It is not the being together that it prolongs, it is the parting. Still, I've never been able to write even a note to the milkman, back when there was a milkman, without a P.S. So let me just stress one last time that the world is full of wonderful stories, heartbreakingly beautiful and witty poems, thrilling works of history, biography, and philosophy. They will make you laugh or hug yourself with pleasure or deepen your thinking or move you as profoundly as any experience this side of a serious love affair. None of us, of course, will ever read all the books we'd like, but we can still make a stab at it. Why deny yourself all that pleasure? So look around tonight or this weekend. See what catches your fancy on the bookshelf, at the library, or in the bookcase. Maybe try something a little unusual, a little different, and then don't stop. Do it again, with a new book or an old author the following week. Go on. Be bold. Be insatiable. Be restlessly, unashamedly promiscuous. Anyway, that's this book. You know, they had copies, but I think they sold them all out at the Dreamhaven bought some. Of course, I never think about these things till far too late, so I didn't have any arranged to come here. But you can obviously buy it online or through some bookshops, and you might enjoy that. And are there any questions? Please, I'm happy to answer questions about this book or about reviewing or publishing, the Washington Post, anything might be on your mind. If not, how are we doing on time? Are we close to half an hour?
7 minutes.
7 minutes, well. At the moment, I was talking to Rebecca here earlier, I'm working on a book about popular fiction in the late 19th and early 20th century, so that's my next project. Rob Knowlton has been one of my resources here, someone who knows more about the world of supernatural literature than probably anyone else on this continent. But I'm some of the writers I'm talking about are people like Haggard and Buchan and Sabatini and M.R. James and Arthur Machen and Algernon Blackwood and Lafcadio Hearn, all sorts of people who wrote popular fiction at a time when, for the first time really, you had cheap paper available, you had mass literacy, and you didn't yet have the competition of radios and TVs and the like. So you had this, in one generation, this upsurge of magazine fiction, the creation of the modern genres, really in this one lifetime, and a lot of our iconic figures, same Sherlock Holmes, the Scarlet Pimpernel, Prisoner of Zenda, all sorts of people that we remember, Peter Pan, all come out of this one period. So I'm writing about it, and I'm writing about it in a very appreciative, essayistic, personal kind of way. It's not going to be a scholarly book at all. There was a time when I wanted to be a scholar, and got a PhD and all that, but I quickly drifted into journalism and never looked back. And I've always tried to write for other readers and other people who like books, rather than to write for specialists. So my hope is to inspire people to go back and look at some of these works that are fun in themselves. Some are dated, some have period issues that we would object to in ways of racism or the like. But you have to deal with those things in the way you have to deal with any literature of the past. And, but the books themselves and the stories, they've been mined by Hollywood for movies and by later writers ever since. And I think it's important to bear in mind our roots. Ezra Pound always argued that if you were going to be a poet, the important poetry to learn was the earliest possible examples of the various genres, because there are things had been established, the forms of the sonnets and the forms of lyrics, and you would study them, and once you grasped those things, you could apply them to everything that fell out afterwards. Same idea that if you read the Odyssey, you will understand when early in the Inferno, when we have a section about Ulysses traveling. Later on, you have Joyce's Ulysses, or you have Tennyson's Ulysses. We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. That which we are, what equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, and strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Imagine my surprise when Judi Dench started to say that in the last James Bond movie. I remember just before there's the attack on that committee. Anyway, that's what I'm working on now. And Rebecca, you have a quick question?
Couple notes. Well, you a couple wonderful. Well, I just skimmed them, just read a few essays that you recommended. But there was a wonderful books that change your lives. Books that you had a list.
Oh yeah, I like lists. Lots of lists.
That's just
favorite titles.
Absolute books that you go back continuously. Like myself, I started reading Ernest Thompson Seton when I was like 10 years old.
Yeah, Wild Animals.
But I keep biography of Grizzly. But I keep going back. I keep every 4 or 5 years. Seton for me had a very clear vision of things.
Oh.
But it's different for everybody. But the idea that there's for everybody, there's books like that, books that they become part of your internal mental framework. You absorb them into yourself. And I thought that was a wonderful.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I do have. There's one of my favorite book titles. My favorite book title of all time is Persuasion, Jane Austen. It's also a wonderful book. It's a book about second chances. So after you get to a certain age, the idea of second chances is one that becomes very attractive. But again, I think they signaled the time is up. They probably have someone else coming, and hope you're all having a good convention. Thank you to
Thank you, Michael.